My mother told me I'd never measure up to my older sister and I'd be better off leaving the family. I didn't say a word. I just got in my car and drove away. Last night I checked my bank account and found every single cent drained. I should have sensed something was off the moment I parked in front of my parents' house that evening. My father's car was absent, which was unusual for a Saturday. My mother, Natalia, was standing by the door, arms crossed, looking like she was gearing up for battle rather than a family dinner. Inside, the house felt tense, like even the walls were waiting for something to erupt. My older sister Amber breezed past me with a quick nod, refusing to meet my eyes. We used to be close once upon a time, but somewhere between her straight-A record, Ivy League acceptance, and job at a top firm, I'd apparently fallen off everyone's radar. We sat down to eat. The conversation was stilted, mostly forced pleasantries. Amber talked about her upcoming promotion and her fiancé, who was evidently perfect in every imaginable way. My mother asked how my job search was going, which was code for, "Why haven't you found anything better yet?" Halfway through the meal, she set down her fork and fixed me with a stare. "You know," she began, "I'm not sure why you're still trying to float through life. It's embarrassing, especially when your sister is achieving so much." I swallowed hard. "Mom, I'm in between jobs, not drifting aimlessly. I've sent out dozens of applications and—" She waved a hand dismissively. "Excuses again. If you can't keep up in this family, you might as well—" Her voice faltered for a second but then hardened. "It'd be better if you left, permanently." Silence fell. Amber shifted uncomfortably, but she didn't speak up for me. She never did these days. My father wasn't there to offer any sort of buffer, so I just stared at my plate. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that comes right before you realize there's no going back. "All right," I said quietly, "if that's what you really want." I stood, grabbed my jacket. My mother just pursed her lips, eyes flicking away, like watching me walk out was simultaneously satisfying and painful for her. Amber remained still, her face blank, neither defending me nor contradicting our mother. I waited for some sign of solidarity that never came. I left without another word, hopped into my car, and drove until the gaslight blinked. Ended up in a dingy motel an hour outside the city. Spent the night staring at the peeling wallpaper and ignoring the pit in my stomach. When morning came, I did a routine check of my bank account, only to find it completely wiped out. The small savings I had, gone. I felt a chill creep over me. My mother had ways of making her threats real, and I realized this was her way of warning me. If you won't live by my rules, I'll make sure you can't live at all. Update 1. First, I want to thank everyone who reached out. I didn't realize so many strangers could offer more empathy than my own family. Late last night, I checked a few missed texts from my sister, Amber. She'd left a long voicemail. Half apology, half excuse. She said, "Mom doesn't really mean it. She's just stressed about me getting married soon, about Dad's health, about finances." I couldn't tell if she was genuinely worried about me or just trying to keep the peace. My mother's texts, on the other hand, were short and barbed. "Where did you go? Stop acting immature. You know you can't survive on your own." Ironic, considering she's the one who cut me off at the knees. Meanwhile, I found a sympathetic ear in my friend Caleb, who offered his couch. "It's cramped, but it's better than that motel. At least I don't have to worry about my funds suddenly vanishing. There's nothing left to vanish." Then came a bombshell. My father called. He sounded weak, like he'd aged overnight. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have been home. Please come back. Your mother's just upset." He trailed off, sounding like he was turning the phone away to check if my mother was listening. I wanted to ask about his health, where he'd been that night, but the call ended abruptly. Moments later, Amber texted, "They're fighting. Dad left for the clinic again. It's bad. They never told me Dad was ill. Guilt gnawed at me. Should I go back, even if it means facing my mother's contempt?" Just as I was about to drive over, Amber messaged me again. "Mom threatened to cut Dad off financially, if he defends you." The real problem snapped into focus. My mother's need for control overshadowed everything else, even Dad's welfare. Update 2. Things spiraled quickly. I'd been at Caleb's place for a few days, ignoring calls. Then an eviction notice showed up on his door. Totally baseless. Caleb's on a month-to-month lease and never misses rent. But the landlord admitted he got a big offer to force him out. No guessing who made that offer. Caleb was livid. "She's playing dirty, man," he said, tossing the paper on the table. "What are you going to do?" My mother has connections, real estate, local officials, anything to make my life, or my friends' lives, miserable. If pushing me out wasn't enough, she'd stomp on anyone who gave me a place to land. Then Amber texted me again, practically pleading for me to see Dad in the hospital. Turns out his condition had worsened enough to require urgent care. I felt nauseated. This was the first I'd heard of it. I went to the hospital early this morning, half hoping my mother wouldn't be there. But of course she was, perched beside Dad like a guard dog. The moment she saw me, her eyes narrowed. "Why are you here?" Dad looked frail, IV drip in his arm. He tried to speak, but she cut him off. "Don't upset him," she hissed. "He needs rest, not your drama." I forced my voice steady. "I'm not here to fight. I just want to see Dad." She stood, arms crossed. "If you cared, you wouldn't have left." Her tone dripped with derision. "You want to kill him with stress?" I nearly lost it. "You told me to leave. You practically pushed me out the door." Dad croaked my name, lifting a trembling hand. She literally stepped between us. "Don't," she warned, then glared at me. "Leave or I'll call security." Amber hovered near the door, tears in her eyes, but said nothing. Again. I turned around and walked away, Dad's faint voice trailing after me. "Wait," but overshadowed by my mother barking orders at the nurses. Update 3. A day later, a call from an unknown number lit up my phone. Usually I'd ignore it, but something told me to answer. It was my aunt, my mother's estranged sister. "I heard what happened," she whispered. "I've got information you'll want." We met in a dingy cafe on the edge of town. She arrived looking over her shoulder, clearly nervous. Then she produced a manila folder, dropping it onto the table. Inside were documents, bank statements, old emails, records of hush payments. My mother had been siphoning funds from Dad's medical trust for years. She'd let his care deteriorate so she could invest in shady deals and funnel money to personal accounts. "This is why your father's condition is worse than it should be," my aunt said. "Your mother refused certain treatments. She didn't want questions about where the trust's money actually went." My stomach twisted as I flipped through the evidence. I'd always known my mother was controlling, but this was bordering on criminal. She wasn't just bullying me, she was endangering Dad. Before leaving, my aunt grabbed my hand. "Do something," she pleaded. "She can't keep hurting people like this." That evening, I took the folder back to Caleb, studying every page. Fraud, extortion, maybe even money laundering. But turning her in could drag Dad into a legal battle he might not survive. The weight of it all nearly crushed me. Final update. If you're still here, thank you. The last few days have been a whirlwind. I confronted my mother at her house. Dad was still hospitalized. Amber was out. She answered the door, face like stone. "Change your mind about crawling back?" She sneered. "Not exactly." I held up the folder. "Want to explain how you've been emptying Dad's medical trust into your own pockets?" For a second, fear flickered in her eyes. Then she tried to snatch the folder from me, but I kept it away. She launched into a tirade about how I'd never understand, how she was doing it for the family. I just quietly turned on my phone's recorder. She spilled everything, maybe from panic, maybe arrogance. She described the shell companies, the payoffs, and how she planned to pin any suspicion on me if things went south. When she finally stopped, I turned off the recorder. She lunged, but I slipped my phone into my pocket. I took the evidence to a lawyer, a friend of my aunt's who was prepared to help. Within hours, we froze the trust, ensuring Dad's medical bills would be paid directly. Investigators were alerted. My mother tried calling in favors, but the tide had turned. No one wanted to be caught in her legal fiasco. Dad was transferred to a more reputable hospital ward, fully covered by the reactivated trust. Doctors said he had a real chance now. My mother tried to visit, but the staff refused to grant her access without clearance. She paced the lobby, raging at anyone who'd listen. "Amber?" She left a voicemail in tears, apologizing for never defending me. She's staying with our aunt, figuring out how to handle the wedding without our mother's looming shadow. I can't say I blame her. She was raised in that environment too. And me? I'm in a small apartment, courtesy of landing a new job at a nonprofit that helps families navigate medical finances. Ironic, right? Feels good to use my own experience for something positive. Yesterday, I received a single text from my mother. "You betrayed me." I just stared at the screen, remembering all the times she'd said I wasn't good enough. This time, I let the words roll off. Because sometimes, betrayal is the only way to protect the people who matter, the people she claimed to love but used as pawns. Dad's health is improving daily. He'll stay with my aunt after discharge, free from my mother's manipulations. Amber is free to live her life on her own terms. And I'm no longer weighed down by the constant feeling of not measuring up to impossible standards. It's not a clean ending. It's messy and raw, but it's honest. And for the first time, I can breathe without hearing my mother's voice in my head. Because real family, real love doesn't threaten your future or your father's life just to keep control. Real love steps aside and lets you grow. I don't know what tomorrow looks like. Maybe more legal battles, maybe more secrets will emerge. But for now, Dad is safe, Amber is discovering who she is, and I'm standing on my own feet. That feels like victory enough.